There is a man who never died. It's not a metaphor, not a legend. According to ancient writings, one day he walked before God and simply disappeared from earth. At 7 years old, he conversed with angels. At 325 years old, he saw secrets that humanity should never have known. And when he turned 365, in a single moment, he crossed the boundary of mortality. The name Enoch is barely known today, yet he is one of the most important figures in the history of human spirituality. But who was he really? And why was he almost completely erased from history? The story begins approximately 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, according to biblical chronology. Enoch was the sixth descendant of Adam, the great-great-grandson of Cain and Abel's great-grandson. According to the book of Genesis, he was the son of Jared, who fathered him at 122 years old. But Enoch was not an ordinary man. Even in childhood, there was something special about him, something that set him apart from other people. According to ancient Hebrew tradition, Enoch was able to communicate with beings that people called angels from a very young age. At 7 years old, he had his first vision. This was not a dream, not a fantasy. Enoch himself wrote later, "Gates opened before him between the visible and invisible worlds. He saw things that the human mind can barely comprehend, and these visions never left him throughout his life." The society of his time didn't understand Enoch. While others cultivated land, raised animals, and started families, he would withdraw for hours and speak of things no one else saw. But he wasn't insane. On the contrary, Enoch's knowledge was so deep that he was soon considered the wisest man in the entire region. He taught people to read and write, showed them the movement of the stars, the changing of seasons, the laws of nature. He possessed knowledge that suggests his source was not merely human learning. But what exactly was that special connection that Enoch maintained with the spiritual world? According to ancient texts, these weren't simply visions. Enoch physically traveled to places that human civilization had never known. The so-called Book of Enoch, which remained hidden for centuries, describes these journeys in detail. One of the most shocking episodes occurred when Enoch was taken to heaven. Not symbolically, not in a dream. According to the description, he ascended with his physical body beyond the earthly plane. He traversed 7 heavens, each with different beings, energies, and knowledge. Through the first heaven, he saw the angels of weather, who control storms, wind, and snow. In the second heaven, he saw fallen beings who had committed sin and awaited their judgment. In the third heaven, he glimpsed paradise, the place where the souls of the righteous go after death. But the story doesn't end here. Enoch was taken further. He traversed the 4th, 5th, and 6th heavens, discovering new and deeper secrets about the workings of the universe everywhere. And finally, he reached the 7th heaven, where the Godhead itself dwells. He was there, at the source of creation, and saw what no mortal man had seen before. Enoch described what he saw: a mighty throne whose light was more blinding than 1,000 suns. Around it, countless hosts of angels singing praise without ceasing. And there, before the throne, stood Enoch, a simple man who found himself in the midst of infinity. He asked questions and received answers, such answers that changed everything humanity had known about existence until then. The Book of Enoch gives detailed accounts of what he learned on these journeys. He learned the names and orbits of the stars. He saw how solar systems are born and die. He understood time, which appears linear to human consciousness, but exists quite differently in higher dimensions. He learned what happens to the human soul after death, how it passes through different states before reaching its final destination. But the most shocking discovery was what he learned about the fallen angels. According to the book of Enoch, sometime long ago, before the great flood, certain angels fell to earth. These beings, whom the scripture calls watchers, fell in love with human women and fathered children with them. These offspring were giants with extraordinary abilities, but their nature was distorted. They brought violence and chaos into the world. Enoch had a special role in this story. One day the fallen angels came to him and begged, "Go before God and intercede for them. Ask God to forgive their sins." Enoch did what they asked. He ascended to heaven and delivered the message of the fallen angels. But the answer was bitter. There is no forgiveness for them. They did what they should not have done, and they must bear the consequences of their actions. This part of the story shows stunning parallels with many modern spiritual teachings. The concept of karma, the consequences of actions, freedom of choice and responsibility, all of this appears already in Enoch's writings, millennia before these concepts became popular in the Western world. And then there is Enoch's own fate. He lived on earth for 365 years. The biblical Genesis writes precisely this about him. Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. He didn't die. He wasn't buried. He simply disappeared. According to Hebrew tradition, Enoch underwent a transformation. His physical body was transformed, took on a form that was capable of existing in higher dimensions. He became the archangel Metatron, one of the most powerful angelic beings in the celestial hierarchy. But what actually happened? Was this a physical ascension? An expansion of his consciousness? Or something entirely different that human language is incapable of adequately describing? When we think about it, Enoch's story is not unique. We find similar figures in other cultures. There is, for example, the prophet Elijah, who was also taken up to heaven alive in a chariot of fire, or Jesus' ascension. In Hindu tradition, several saints are said to have transformed their bodies and instead of dying, left the earthly plane in a light body. In Tibetan Buddhism, Dzogchen practitioners sometimes reach a state called the rainbow body. At death, their body literally dissolves into light. Enoch's story, therefore, is not an isolated phenomenon, but part of a much larger pattern that weaves through humanity's spiritual history. The idea that exceptional souls are capable of transcending the limitations of death, that they can transform their bodies, that they can directly enter higher states of being. This concept appears again and again in different times and different places. But why is Enoch so important from the perspective of reincarnation? Because his writings speak directly about the journey of the soul. He describes what happens to human consciousness after death. He says that souls go to different places based on their deeds. Some souls reach luminous places, others darkness. But what is truly essential? According to Enoch, these are not eternal, unchangeable states. The soul develops, learns, purifies itself. This is extremely similar to reincarnation teachings, although Enoch's writings don't directly use the word reincarnation. He says that souls exist in different levels of conscious states after death, and these states are connected to how they lived on Earth. But he also implies that this is not the end of the story. The soul continues its journey. Interestingly, most of Christianity does not consider the Book of Enoch authentic. Only the Ethiopian Orthodox Church considers it canonical. Why? Could it be because Enoch's teachings are too close to the ideas of reincarnation, karma, the cyclical evolution of the soul? These are concepts that mainstream Christianity rejects. Still, Enoch's name is there in the Bible. In just a few lines, yes, but it's there. And these lines are enough for us to know. There was a man who had a special connection with the divine, who crossed something that we humans consider a limitation. If we look at what Enoch taught, we see that he placed great emphasis on righteousness, right living, spiritual development. He taught that a person's actions matter, that every deed has consequences. And this is exactly what karmic laws also state. What you sow, you reap, if not in this life, then in the next. There is something else extremely interesting in Enoch's story: his astronomical knowledge. The Book of Enoch describes the movement of the solar system, moon phases, cycles of seasons with such precision that even today's scientists are amazed. How did a man living several thousand years ago have such knowledge? The answer perhaps lies in what we've already mentioned. Enoch drew knowledge from other dimensions, from other states of consciousness, from those where time and space don't work the same way as here on Earth. This is another important connection point to the theme of reincarnation. If consciousness is capable of stepping out of the physical body, existing on other planes, then why would it be unthinkable that after one life it returns again to physical reality in a new body? Enoch's experiences show that consciousness is not exclusively bound to the body. It is capable of transcending it, transforming, existing in another form. And then there is one more very special thing. There are many spiritual traditions that say Enoch is actually still working for humanity. Not only did he live and disappear long ago, but he continues to have an active role in guiding souls. According to Kabbalistic teachings, Metatron, that is Enoch in his angelic form, helps human souls in transition when they leave the physical body. He provides guidance so they don't get lost in the after-death states. This again shows a parallel with the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, where they speak of the intermediate state, the bardo. They say that in this state the soul can meet guides who help it proceed on the right path. Could Enoch or Metatron be one of these guides? According to traditions, yes. But let's return to why this is important today, why it's worth dealing with Enoch now, several thousand years after the events. Because Enoch's story reminds us, human consciousness is capable of much more than what we experience in everyday life. Our limitations are not as rigid as we think. Death is not the final station, but a transition. And spiritual development, the expansion of consciousness, is a real possibility, not just religious or philosophical talk. Enoch didn't wait for others to tell him everything. He went himself, experienced, searched, and when he returned from his journeys, he shared his knowledge. He wrote down what he saw so that others could learn from it too. This attitude is just as relevant today as it was then. Don't just believe or not believe in things, but experience them. Seek your own truth. When we read Enoch's writings, whether the Book of Enoch or the few lines about him in Genesis, we see a man who was not afraid to cross the usual boundaries, who was not satisfied with what his society told him about the world, who asked, researched, and finally received answers that changed his life. In fact, that enabled him to transcend life and death. Many spiritual masters say even today, the greatest knowledge is not in books, but within us. Enoch also taught this. He said that man is capable of a direct connection with the divine, capable of discovering truth within himself. But this requires openness, honesty, and unwavering commitment. And then there is one last, extremely important thing in Enoch's story: freedom of choice. Enoch was not chosen at birth to be a spiritual giant instead of an average person. He decided to walk this path. And it was this choice that made transformation possible for him. And this means we can all choose. We can decide to live only in the visible world, or to open ourselves to the invisible as well. We can decide to experience death as a final end, or as a transition that is part of a larger journey. We can decide that we have only one life, or that through the continuous evolution of the soul, we learn, purify ourselves, and grow across multiple lives. Enoch's story doesn't teach that we will all physically ascend to heaven, but it teaches that our consciousness is capable of expanding, transforming. That human existence is not limited to this one physical life. That there is something greater, deeper, more mysterious waiting for us if we are willing to seek. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson. Don't settle. Don't believe that what we see now is everything. Enoch didn't do that. He moved forward and reached places that others considered impossible. And if he did it, then perhaps we too are capable of this in our own way, on our own path. But there is one more thing I haven't said. According to ancient texts, when God took Enoch, he left one thing behind: a book that was hidden. It's not the book of Enoch we know today. Another writing in which everything is recorded. Every secret, every future event, every soul's path. And according to tradition, this book still exists somewhere, waiting for humanity to be mature enough to find it. Does it really exist? And if so, what would we find in it about ourselves?